Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice, and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Each episode is a conversation with inspiring people who make wonderful contributions to our knowledge in these areas and spark curiosity and ideas to pursue. Join me, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
The U.S. Army has a saying that, they tell their sergeants and everyone else that their first job is to know who's going to replace them if something happens to them. And so we try to use that mindset, with our business owners in the leadership and management teams that we work with. They should always be, grooming their successor, because they never know when something's going to happen to them, whether they leave or, God forbid, something unfortunate happen that requires them to not be able to work. So having that continuity in the organization is really important. And then obviously from an ownership standpoint, it's very, very important because, in a privately held business, if the owner's not there and there's no one else to run the show for them, the business will likely fail and create a lot of headaches and heartaches for the family and customers and employees. So having a continuity of ownership and leadership is probably the most critical thing that an owner can do for themselves and their family.
Hi there, Innovator. It's great to be back with another episode. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. And I trust you enjoyed my recent conversations with Anthony Sarandria, the founder of Site Flood, and with Odette Barry of Odette & Co. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Michael Vann from the Vann Group. Michael is a business and transaction advisor with a passion for the growth and development of high-impact companies. Michael serves as a trusted advisor to owners and leadership teams that require insight and execution of strategic initiatives and transactions such as mergers and acquisitions, the development of joint ventures, and strategic alliances. Also, the acquisition of financing and capital and the launch of new business models and new divisions. Together with his father, Kevin, Michael is co-author of the book Buying Out the Boss, the Successors Guide to Succession Planning. A quick promotional message from our sponsor, that's InnovaBuzz, where we help coaches and consultants build professional credibility, engage their target audience, and connect with their ideal client. That requires absolute clarity about who your ideal clients are and how you can help them. To help you get that clarity about your ideal client, take a look at our Marketing Master mini class, where in less than 30 minutes you'll gain absolute clarity on your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. Access the Marketing Master mini class at innovabuzz.co/Marketing Master. It's completely free and accessible without even giving away your email. In our discussion today, Michael talked to me about why succession planning is vital in any business, and also why contingency planning is also critical. And he explained how to prepare to exit your business in whatever way you may choose to, and how to prepare for the next phase. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Michael Vann. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today, all the way from Springfield, Massachusetts in the USA, Michael Vann, who's a strategic and transactional advisor, and he's also co-author of the book Buying Out the Boss. Welcome to the podcast, Michael. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you for having me.
Laura Briggs, who was our guest on episode 252 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested we have a conversation with you, Michael. So big hello to Laura.
Hi, Laura. Thank you very much for recommending me.
Now, one of the things that you talk about quite a bit in the book is succession planning and buying and selling of businesses. But before we talk about those things and dig deeper, Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to where you are today, and what were some of the key moments in that journey?
Sure. So my family is a very entrepreneurial family. We can trace our entrepreneurial roots back several hundred years. We've done a lousy job working for people historically, whether it's been me or my father or my grandfather. So when I graduated college, I went to work for a few years in a Fortune 500 consulting firm and really just got frustrated and tired with it. So my father said, well, why don't you come back home and, start in the consulting side of our family business? And that was 20 years ago, and didn't think it would last this long, but here I am 20 years later, still working in the family business as a consultant.
Hmm. So is it a third generation business?
It's a second generation, but the second generation, so it's my father, my mother, and my sister and myself. We're all in the family business.
Yeah. So what kind of business did your grandfather do?
So they've done a variety of things. We can trade, it's been everything from real estate development to oil wells to retail shops to probably some other speculative ventures. It was just always something that the family was engaged in. One of my grandfathers was a photographer. The other one owned hardware stores and was in the ice cream business. So we've always found something to dabble in. And even for me, while professional services is kind of the day-to-day, we're partners in restaurants. We have some real estate interests. So we've been very entrepreneurial, even being just professional service providers.
All right. So what do you do today as your main focus, and why?
So we work with the owners of privately held small, mid-sized businesses in kind of three areas. One is in sort of the value building stage. So those are our clients who are thinking about, well, someday I want to exit for a pretty good amount of money, but I know we're not there yet. How do we get to that spot where we can build value? The second is that succession and transition planning space where we have owners who are looking at an exit maybe in the next 3 to 5 years and are starting to contemplate, well, what does that look like? If it's an internal transition, how do I make that happen? If it's external, how do I get the company prepared? And then we have our third category of business owners in the M&A side, which is merger and acquisition, who are screaming, just get me out of the business today. And we work with them in selling their businesses.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's touch a little bit on succession planning, because I think that's a topic that is applicable right across the board, from large
Absolutely.
corporations to smaller corporations, whether that's, the business owner thinking about when he's going to exit the business and how that would happen, to people within a larger organization essentially looking to replace their job. So, because one of the things I noticed in the corporate world is that people who were driven and keen to progress up the corporate ladder, they were always looking out for new opportunities and how they could further their own experience and education so that they were ready to take the next step. But one thing they rarely did was look at, well, who's going to take over my job, which I often thought, it's almost counterintuitive, but that might be the first step to take. What's your take on that?
I think the U.S. Army has a saying that, they tell their sergeants and everyone else that their first job is to know who's going to replace them if something happens to them. And so we try to use that mindset, with our business owners in the leadership and management teams that we work with. They should always be, grooming their successor, because they never know when something's going to happen to them, whether they leave or, God forbid, something unfortunate happened that requires them to not be able to work. So having that continuity in the organization is really important. And then obviously from an ownership standpoint, it's very, very important, because, in a privately held business, if the owner's not there and there's no one else to run the show for them, the business will likely fail and create a lot of headaches and heartaches for the family and customers and employees. So having a continuity of ownership and leadership is probably the most critical thing that an owner can do for themselves and their family.
So what do you think are some of the mindset issues that prevent people from actually taking steps to address this succession planning?
There are several, and we call them the fear factors. One of them is just the simple fear of loss of control. You're a business owner and you have control over everything to a certain degree, right? You determine when you come to work and what you're going to do, what you're not going to do in a lot of ways. And if you suddenly don't own the business, you lose that control. There's the money side of it. A lot of business owners, the business is their most valuable asset. It's where they get their cash flow. So suddenly to be in a scenario where you may not have that business there can be scary for a business owner. There's family issues. There's all those dynamics that come into play because whether the family's in the business or not, you might have a scenario where you're supporting multiple family members outside of the business and you need that revenue, or there might be kids in the business who may not be at the same position, and so it avoids conflict. And then kind of the fourth one, the fear factor is, well, what do I do if I don't own this business? The business. I don't know how many hours you work, but I work probably far too many. And if I wasn't working, I don't know what I would do. And so I at least have the opportunity today to come back and do it. But if you sell the business, now you're stuck with all this time. And, candidly, golf sounds great, but how many times a week can you golf? Travel sounds good too, but that gets boring as well. So you have to have a defined plan in what you want to do. And a lot of business owners haven't given any thought about what they're going to do after they sell that business. That's why you see a lot of them get back into business again, because it's what they know.
Yeah.
So
I think that last one is a really big one. It's the business becomes, as entrepreneurs, I guess, the business becomes such a big part of our identity, and all of a sudden, even if you do have some succession plan in place, that's often not. I've seen good succession plans in place in terms of, the next person to take on the role of the CEO of the business, for example, and that person's been trained up and integrated in the business as a really good cultural fit, takes over the business keeps running really smoothly, everything seems really good, but the business owner who's stepped out of the role hasn't addressed that issue of, well, what do I do now?
Right.
How do I fill my time? But it's more, I think it's more than that. It's how do I do something meaningful that satisfies my own needs for meaning, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen some great stories. Like we had one client who went, Habitat for Humanity, building houses all over the world. That was his retirement goal. We've had others who've done similar things, thrown themselves into charitable endeavors and things like that, or, have become caretakers for their grandchildren and things like that. But they've been very clear that's what they wanted to do. As to why that was actually what was driving the exit, not some artificial timeline or a spouse saying, it's time that we did something else. So they generally hit a spot in life where they wanted to do something else. So it allows them to make that transition a lot easier. And most business owners don't do any planning from that standpoint. Even if we get the ones who do a lot of planning as to who's going to take over the business or when we're going to sell, they still don't do that. We'll build that business plan for the next part of life.
So in some ways it comes back to the big question then, doesn't it? Why are you moving on? Why are you selling?
It does. And for a lot of business owners, there's, different factors. Some of them are just tired and burnt out. There's always the joke that business would be great if I didn't have customers and employees, right? and that drives that thinking. They're just tired of the wear and tear. Others, have had health issues, so that starts to weigh on them. They see, or there's been life changes. Maybe a spouse has gotten ill, or they've seen a dear friend pass away who's made them rethink life. So there's a lot of reasons why business owners make that decision to sell. We saw, one recently, and they just got tired of supporting the family. The business had gotten large enough where there were so many mouths at the table that were involved. It was overwhelming to know that pressure was on him to maintain for X number of families. So a sale, cleared that issue up.
All right. So you mentioned sale there, and the book Buying Out the Boss essentially is focused on the situation where somebody working for a company decides to buy it or has the opportunity to buy it, I guess is a better way to put it, and how to best go about that, what some of the risks are. So tell us a little bit then, paint the picture for us how that might come about, and what are the things to pay attention to, and what makes that different from the situation where, let's say, I'm looking to buy a certain business. I've got an idea of what that business should look like, and then I go and find one which is I'm not related to it at all, but I've identified it ticks all the boxes, and then I go through the steps to buy that. How's that different?
So that differs because it's personal. If you think about it, it's been, if you're a family member, it's likely the business that your parents started or your grandparents, and you're working there. So now there's sort of this legacy to it, and it's been an important part to that standpoint. So there's a personal side to it because you're working every day with your parents or cousins or whoever it may be. And for an employee, it's very personal because it's your livelihood. This is how you support your family. And so when you're getting into these scenarios, you can't possibly treat it typically like an arm's length transaction. Like if I go out and just look for a business on a website and I come across something for sale, if it doesn't work out, no big deal. I'll move on to the next one. But with an internal transition, if it doesn't work out, if I've caused issues with that relationship or vice versa, I could be out of a job, and then I've lost a lot more. So the risk level is different for an internal buyer because they've got these things that online. There's these personal relationships. There's their livelihood. It might be their legacy that's on the line there that they have to deal with. So it creates some additional pressure on an internal transaction. We always say all business is personal, and these types of transactions are really, really personal. And because you know them and you deal with these people, and you know their flaws as well, which is huge. If I'm looking at a regular business, everyone puts on their best smile containing a buyer or a seller. That's not the case in an internal transaction. I've seen someone at their worst. They've seen me at their worst. They know things about how to poke me and how to get me upset or pissed off, and vice versa. I know those types of things. We had a deal that was going on with an internal buyer, and the seller started playing hardball. Well, the internal buyer knew that the seller had just put down a deposit on a new house outside the area, so he didn't have to cave because he knew he had this knowledge, whereas an external buyer would never know that. But because it was an internal scenario, he had heard through the grapevine as to what was going on, so he knew that he kind of had the seller over a barrel.
Yeah.
Because he was already under a purchase and sell agreement on a house.
So how do you navigate through those sort of challenges and those sort of complications?
It's a lot of scotch. No, I mean it's like anything being emotional, which these types of transactions are. It's being able to take a step back and look at the big picture of it. As to how important is this particular issue to me? What am I really trying to achieve with this? I think sometimes with transactions, we see people get really, really emotional about the most inane type of thing. And it's not really that issue. Like we saw one transaction years ago die or almost die because the seller was going to get a car out of the deal, and they were arguing over what would have four-wheel drive or not. All these issues that came out of this huge deal, $2 million and everything else. And this was a major sticking point. It wasn't the matter of whether or not it was four-wheel drive or not. It was just someone got sick of getting pushed, and the other one was sick of getting pushed. So this stupid little issue became this kind of critical point in the deal. So it's having the advisors and having the ability to take a step back from those situations and go, let's not trivialize these small things, and let's look at the big picture of here, what we're trying to achieve, what we want to accomplish. There's a reason why you want to sell me the business. There's a reason why I want to buy this business. Let's figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, of course, getting that emotion out of it, and that, the car sounds like it was just a trigger for something deeper seated, is a lot easier said than done.
No doubt. One of the things, and part of that we do is, and it'll be a pitch for our services or like that, but is using an intermediary as a middle point in that transaction, because, an intermediary serves as that buffer with things. So I get to be if I'm the intermediary, I get to be the bad guy sometimes, right, rather than my client. My job is to make sure that relationship survives and that emotion doesn't boil over into the negotiations and the conversations. So using that intermediary in those regards, I get to guide things and keep that relationship intact, keep the deal on pace.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and certainly, and you're not emotionally attached to the outcomes as much. I mean, you probably are if you're being paid.
Yeah, I mean, you get passionate
succeed,
about, right?
yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know what your job is, and that's to do what's best for your client, and to represent and advocate for your client's interests. So, if that case, I always look at it as even if we lose a deal, which doesn't happen a lot, but does, as long as I did my best for the client and represented their interests and got them what they wanted, or were comfortable when they decided to walk away, and it was a smart decision, I'm fine with losing a deal.
Yeah, that's right. And also, there might be situations where it's not the right thing to do to sell, but you want to make sure that's a conscious decision on both parts, and it's not because they couldn't agree over two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive.
Yeah, and to your point, one of the things we see sometimes in deals, either buyer or seller, is they lose track of things because they're focused on getting the deal done. So there's like this tunnel vision. Well, we have to do this deal, even if it's gone south and it may not be a good deal to do anymore. There's almost like obsessiveness because we're a type A personality, and I'm going to own this company, or I'm going to, it has to happen, and that's not a good spot to be in with a transaction.
Yeah. All right. And now one of the other things you talk about in your book is the idea of business value, and particularly the difference between what the seller's perspective is on the value of the business and what the buyer's perspective is. So talk us through that one a little bit, because I found that fascinating.
Well, sellers always think their baby is worth more than it is, right? So they have this. Most of them have this very delusional perspective on it. And I was funny. Right before our call here today, I was on the call with a seller that we're working with, and we're walking through the valuation. This is a small company. It does a couple $1 million a year. It makes a couple $100,000 a year. And when I explained to the seller that it's probably worth $400,000 or $500,000, $600,000 at the most, he was shocked. He was appalled. How can this not be worth $1 million, $1.5 million? And I said, well, you only make X, and you're working in it full time. So essentially, someone's going to come and buy your job. How much would you pay for your job? And of course, we get silence on that because no one wants to think about their business that way. But in a lot of small businesses, that's what we're doing. We're selling a job. And so how much does that job have as value? So that's a challenge for a lot of our sellers, is to put that aside and go, no, we're not gonna have this inflated sense of value on the business, because realistically, it's only worth what the cash flow says and what someone's willing to pay us for. Conversely, on the buyer side, we've got individuals who can get really too conservative and critical sometimes on things. They just look at everything that's wrong and forget there's a reason why you like the business in the first place.
Yeah.
The seller is not in a position where they have to give this away. So be practical and reasonable. And I get you have your concerns about this or that, but the business has been here for 20, 30, 40 years. Keep that into context when we're talking about value. So there's always just those differing opinions between the two parties, and ideally we have to find a way to bridge the gap.
Yeah. All right. Now, for someone that might be thinking, well, I'm not thinking of selling my business, or I'm thinking of being here for 5 years at least, but if they're actually smart and want to plan longer term, let's say 7 to 10 years out time frame, and maybe look at their options then, maybe move on, maybe sell, maybe go do something else. What kind of things would you recommend that they start implementing now for that plan? Sort of get the business and themselves into the right shape for having the maximum choices available to them when they get 7 or 10 years down the track and get to that point.
So one of the first things we recommend is that you sit down with a financial advisor, so you can understand what those proceeds need to be from a sale. that's really important, because if I take you to market and I get you an offer and it turns out it's not enough money, you're not going to want to sell. Then you're going to be really disappointed in this process. You're stuck with this business. The second thing to do while you're doing that, obviously, is you get a valuation, so you understand where the value of the company is today versus where you want it to be or where you need it to be from your financial advisor. Because once we know what that gap is, we can help identify the steps that you need to take to how to get that value there. The third thing we suggest is that you go through an exercise where you look at your business like a buyer. Come in really critical and dig deep into it and start to understand what's right with the business and what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what are those gaps, what are those areas. If you were buying your business, what would you be critical about? So that's an important piece to do as well. The fourth piece, and it's really missed in most plans, is the contingency plan. So yeah, we know we're going to have an exit in 7 or 10 years, and I want to sell, go to market and get the best price. But what happens to the business if something happens on that way? Who's going to take over the day-to-day operations for it? How's your family going to deal with this business? How are we going to deal with creditors? Those types of things. So what's that continuity plan in place for the business if something happens? There's, we have a friend going through a situation right now where that planning wasn't done. So the family is dealing with these issues of the business today because dad died unexpectedly. So, the ownership is in kind of some disarray in some spots, and we've got to figure out who's really in charge and who can make decisions. And you have nervous employees, you have nervous vendors. So, having a contingency plan in place for these things is absolutely critical, and that should be in place for whether you're looking at selling in a couple of years or in 25 years. Always that worst case scenario planning.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because even if you're thinking of holding the business for the long term, there's always unexpected things that can happen.
Definitely.
And then the other thing that I think is a really important point is transition planning. So let's say the business owner has sold the business, or however the handover occurs, but it's been successful in that point. What constitutes a good transition plan? Because obviously, there's lots of uncertainty in that handover period.
So a good transition plan is one that basically allows an owner to sell when they want, to whom they want, and for the price they want. So they have complete control over those things for as much as they can control them. So what we want to be able to say is, I know I need X dollars for the business, so I want to be in a position where the business can achieve that. This is when I want to exit. So I need the business to be in a position where I can actually exit at that point in time. And this is who I want to have the business. So I want to make sure that I'm selling either, if it's an internal situation, I want to be sure that I'm positioned to allow my employees or my family members to be able to take the business over. If it's to a strategic or one of those types of things, I want to be sure that I'm in a position that they're able to buy me at that time for that price and when I want to sell. So for us, a good transition plan addresses all three of those things and allows that execution to occur.
Yeah. And they're really good points to think about up front as well.
Definitely.
And because that then raises questions like, well, what kind of preparation needs to happen? What kind of training needs to be done to the people taking over critical roles? What kind of information needs to be documented so that it's all available once the business owner is away from the business and people can't just knock on his door and say, well, how do we do this?
Exactly. There's a stat that was published, I think, by Mass Mutual a few years ago, who did a survey. Basically, it was more than half of business owners felt their successor wasn't prepared to take over the business. And there was something crazy like 25% of the successors didn't even know they were the successor. So it tells you kind of the state of how we look at planning, in that window. But that's really critical, because it goes back to that first point we made when we started the conversation about you should always have your successor prepared. You should know who that is. And most business owners fail at that standpoint. In some levels, it's sad. We go into a lot of family businesses that are really nice businesses, and there are children in the business. And you say, well, Why are you talking to us about selling outside? Well, because the kids really aren't capable of running it. Is that the fault of the child who's been in the business for 20 years, or is it the fault of mom and dad who, you know, never mentored and taught and coached and got them in a position to be able to run the business? So I always look at those. It's kind of a sad story that this family business isn't going to be able to have that continuity to the next generation because the successor wasn't prepared.
Yeah, and I think that plays out in a lot of scenarios. I mean, I've seen it play out in fairly largish privately owned companies that, I mean, you see it all the time, actually. These fairly large privately owned companies that have a very rich history and culture, and they get gobbled up by the big multinationals because of exactly that. They haven't actually got, I mean, there might be other business reasons they're not sustainable for some reason or other, but often it's because there's no continuity or no succession plan at the very senior levels that's been implemented or hasn't been done well.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
All right. Well, this is fascinating, Michael. I could dig into this a lot more, but I'm aware of the time. So I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. And I've got 5 short questions. It's designed to help our audience, who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field, with some tips from your experience. So there's 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some really insightful answers that'll inspire people to go and do something awesome today as a result.
All right, I'm ready.
Number 1 is, what's the number 1 thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
To me, it's always about having the time set aside to work on the business and think about it. So one of the things we advise our clients, and I do it myself, is to have these clarity breaks, basically, where you're going to set aside a day or a block of time and you shut everything down and you just focus on the business. So for me, it's every Sunday morning. I get up at 5:30 or 6, and I use that time before the family gets up to just start to brainstorm on the business as to what would be great to do next, or lay my thoughts down for whatever we're writing or working on. So I get some really great insights as to what I should be doing with the business.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Working on the business. I mean, it's the whole Michael Gerber philosophy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And do you write things down as you get ideas and to build on them? Yeah,
I do. I probably write too much, but as far as like taking notes and things and keeping track of them, and one of the tools I use a lot is mind maps. Which are great for just kind of throwing things out there and random thoughts, and you can move them around and in that type of way. So it's a great tool for me to just capture a lot of random thoughts.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mind mapping. Do it all the time. All right. Now, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
That's a good question. So I think the best thing I've probably done is listen to my clients and my customers as to where their needs are taking them. A lot of our practice and the things that we do for them has evolved because of things I'm hearing from one customer as a pain point for them. And so when I learn about the pain point, I immediately have to start to think, right, all right, well, how can I help them solve this issue? And so that's allowed us to, develop different deliverables or different areas of expertise that I normally wouldn't have even gone into or thought of if I didn't have this customer who was, dealing with this particular pain point in their business.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I mean, we talk a lot about listening to the customer and so on, but being really clear about listening to, here's a pain point, here's something that somebody's struggling with, or it's costing them money or time, or it's frustrating them. So what can I do to help that and remove that obstacle? Great, I love it. Now, do you have a favorite resource? You mentioned mind mapping. Is there something else that you use a lot?
I do. I use Trello quite a bit. Trello. It's like the Kanban cards use it for project management, my to-do lists, that type of thing. So it's really great. I can talk to my assistant that way, Tasker. I can prioritize, the things that I'm doing, what I should be focusing on, and manage my time better. So I find that system really helpful for me. I'm just kind of keeping my world in perspective. overwhelm. Email and everything else, what becomes hot.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, well, Trello, I mean, those Kanban boards are really another visual way of presenting. I find they're very compatible with mind mapping. If you're kind of used to mind mapping and thinking along mind maps, then Kanban boards, I mean, for me, Kanban boards are really a natural fit.
yeah, no, I love them. You just move a card from one place to the other. It's kind of addicting actually. Build all these different boards for things, but
Yeah. When you move something from in progress to done, it's a big endorphin hit, right?
there's nothing I love more than to check something off the to-do list.
Yeah.
I'll put things on the to-do list that weren't even on the to-do list, but that I did, like that wasn't on the list. I could put that on so I can take it off. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I actually started doing that now. If I do something that wasn't on the list, I'll add it to the list, check it off, because that way I've got a record of what I've done.
exactly.
And this conversation was about, it's also important to kind of see what you have done and keep track of that, celebrate that. But also, if you're not doing the right things, suddenly you'll see, why have I done all those things? And here's a list of not done things. They're actually more important.
That's absolutely correct. One of our clients, they track their leadership team tracks the number of issues they solve. And so we've been working with them for like 6 years. They're up to like something like 800, 900, 1,000 issues that they've solved in their weekly leadership team meetings. And so whenever they kind of hit those points, they're like, God, we're not seeming to get anything done. You just point to that list and you see pages and pages of things. So it's kind of empowering from that standpoint.
Yes. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track, or a sale, perhaps a transaction?
From my standpoint, it's always using milestones a lot, at those time frames, and breaking things down into manageable components. What I've noticed with a lot of clients, and they're similar to myself, is you can tell them what to do. They can get really jazzed about it, but then as soon as they leave the meeting, they got to go to work and work on the business. So if we can break things down into bite-sized pieces for them, as to, all right, this is just what you need to get done today, or can you just get this done this week? And suddenly those bigger projects and bigger initiatives don't feel so big, and sometimes we'll also have them team up, so we'll give them an accountability partner to hold each other accountable. So does that help? It's kind of like, no one wants to fail if someone's going to hold them feel bad about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, accountability is a big thing. I think I'm always reminded of our kids' piano teacher when people say, break things down into small chunks. So I was always amazed at how our kids at a very young age could learn these, 30, 40-minute piano concertos off by memory and perform them. And I'd have this conversation every now and then with the piano teacher, and she said, well, it's very simple. It's like eating pizza. It's just one little bit at a time.
Yeah. I watch my daughter do it with dance moves. She's similar to the piano. It's just, she'll watch a quick clip of a video and she can duplicate it. And next thing you know, she's got a 5-minute routine. I couldn't remember the first 3 things about that, but she's,
that's right. Yeah. So if you break them down into small components.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
To me, so as a professional service provider, and it probably applies to anyone, it's just, I've always found that if you're honest, about what you're dealing with your clients, I always look at my clients pay me for my opinion, and they pay me sometimes to say things that they don't want to hear, but they know they need to hear. So as long as I'm honest about in standing behind what I'm saying, there's nothing bad to me that can ever happen. I always look at the worst thing that ever happens is, someone fires me. That's the worst that can happen. But if I held back an opinion or I didn't give them the right advice or guidance, far worse things could happen to them in their business than me getting fired. So I always found that, just be honest about what you think and explain why you have that opinion that you do. And, to this day, I've never had a client fire me for being honest.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it's a little sad in a way that that does differentiate you, but I think you're right, and part of it's being authentic and knowing your stuff and being clear, having that clear communication with clients to say, I know you might not like to hear this, but this is a really important thing you have to consider.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Michael. This has been really great. Now, where can people find out more about you and what you do, and also the book, Buying Out the Boss?
Yeah. So you can find us on the web at Vann, which is VANN-group.com. That's our main company website. And you can also find the book at buyingouttheboss.com. And if you purchase it and use the code BeTheBoss, you'll get $5 off the price of the book.
That's very generous. Thank you. Now, what parting piece of advice would you like to leave the listener today, particularly in their aspirations to being a leader in innovation and in their field?
I mean, my thought process on leadership, that the number one objective of a leader is to make the people around you successful. And if you can, consistently do that, people are going to look to you. People are going to reach out to you. Things go well. People take care of you, and you take care of people. So I always look at my objective with my clients, and I'm not a leader in the traditional sense in their business, but I always try to make them successful. And because of that, they refer me to other clients, and because they've been successful. So I find that any leader's job is to help others be successful first and foremost. If you can do that, then they'll look at you as a leader. Yeah,
that's great advice. I love that. Certainly, you mentioned that as a philosophy for the business, and I think every business should be aiming towards that. But then in the context of today's conversation about succession planning in particular, that, making your own people inside the company successful and in giving them all that they need to kind of take on more and grow is all part of that succession planning thing too.
Yes, it is.
All right. Now, finally, Michael, who would you like me to chat with on a future InnovaBuzz podcast, and why?
So who I would recommend would be Megan Lynch. Megan is the president and owner of 6 Point Creative. And 6 Point is a firm here in Massachusetts that specializes in brand strategy for second stage companies. They're a client of ours, and Megan is just an incredible thought leader and visionary on that side of the world as to those specific types of companies and how they tell their story. She would be a great one to talk to.
All right, sounds fascinating. So we'll get an introduction to Megan from you and invite her onto the podcast for the future. So thanks so much for sharing your time and insights with us so generously today, Michael. This has been wonderful. There's been, I think, lots of great information here, even if people are not contemplating selling their business in the short term. I think there's lots of food for thought here and things to consider implementing in your business for that time, if it comes, or even just to improve the business's overall health and financial well-being as well. So thanks so much, and I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Definitely, and thank you for having me. It was fun.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and informative conversation with Michael and took something away from his episode. For me, the clear message is that both succession planning and contingency planning should be in place for any business. It should be part of your overall business environment. I'd love to know what you took away from Michael's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Michael Vann. That is MichaelVann. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Michael Vann. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Michael there, as well as links to the website of the Vann Group, to the book Buying Out the Boss, to Michael's social media pages, and the other resources that we spoke about in our conversation today. Michael suggested that we have a conversation with Megan Lynch of 6 Point Creative on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So, Megan, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Michael Vann. Remember to check out our Marketing Master mini class at innovabiz.co/Marketing Master. It's completely free and accessible without even giving away your email. But most importantly, it will enable you in less than 30 minutes to gain absolute clarity about who your ideal client is and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. And if you'd like our help to go even deeper into marketing mastery, or our help with producing your very own podcast, even launching your very own podcast if you don't yet have one, then send me an email to jurgen@innovabiz.co and we can set up a quick call to have a short conversation and find out whether we're a good fit for one another. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got some more fantastic guests lined up, including Tony DeVale of Life Masters and David Breyer, brand strategist. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the InnovaBuzz podcast at innovabuzz.com/subscribe. innovabuzz.com/subscribe. Make sure you never miss another episode. It would also mean a lot to me if you leave us a review, because what you think matters. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, or questions you have, so go ahead and share them in the comments below the blog post for this episode. Until next time, I'm Jurgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.